He thought he was untouchable. Dylan Moore, the CEO of Moore Capital, sat in his 45th floor office, popping a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon with a woman who wasn't his wife. He believed his pregnant wife, Audrey, was at home, knitting booties and waiting for his call. He was wrong. At 2:15 p.m., a courier didn't just deliver an envelope, he delivered a bomb that would shatter Dylan's empire. This isn't just a story about cheating, it's a masterclass in revenge. Watch how a betrayed woman turned her pain into the most brutal business transaction of the century. The air inside the corner office of Moore Capital always smelled of expensive leather and chilled ambition. Dylan Moore liked it that way. At 38, Dylan was the kind of man who wore three-piece suits on casual Fridays and checked his stock portfolio before he checked his pulse. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the grey sprawl of Manhattan, a crystal flute of champagne in one hand. Behind him, draped casually over his mahogany desk, was Isabella. She was 24, an Instagram model with a hazy portfolio, but a very clear agenda. She laughed, a sound like tinkling glass, and kicked her heels off onto the Persian rug. "You're terrible, Dylan," she purred, tracing the rim of her glass. "What if she calls?" Dylan took a sip, turning to face her. His smile was easy, practiced. "Audrey, she won't call. She's at her prenatal yoga class in Tribeca. Besides, she thinks I'm in a merger meeting with the Japanese partners. The woman trusts me blindly. It's almost boring." "Boring is good for us," Isabella said, sliding off the desk and walking toward him. She adjusted the lapel of his Tom Ford jacket. "So, the Hamptons this weekend. You promised." "I have to tell her it's a golf retreat," Dylan mused, checking his Rolex, a Submariner, a gift from Audrey for their 5th anniversary. "But yes, the Hamptons. Just us." The intercom on his desk buzzed, a harsh, jarring sound that cut through the intimacy. Dylan sighed, pressing the button. "Mrs. Higgins, I told you. Do not disturb. I'm in a high-level strategy session." "I apologize, Mr. Moore," the voice of his 60-year-old executive assistant crackled through. Mrs. Higgins had been with the company longer than Dylan had. She was efficient, maternal, and usually terrified of him. Today, her voice sounded different, strained. "There is a courier here. He insists on a personal handoff. He says it's legal correspondence regarding the acquisition." Dylan's eyes lit up. He looked at Isabella and winked. The impossible acquisition. Finally. "Send him in," Dylan commanded. He turned to Isabella. "Go into the private bathroom, just for 2 minutes. This is the deed to the new commercial complex in Dumbo. I need to sign it personally." Isabella rolled her eyes, but grabbed her purse and slipped into the adjoining executive suite bathroom. Dylan straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and assumed the posture of a titan of industry. The door opened. It wasn't the usual FedEx guy. This man was dressed in a dark grey suit, looking more like an undertaker than a messenger. He carried a thick manila envelope with a red seal. "Dylan Moore?" the man asked. "That's me. Just put it on the desk." "I need to verify your identity, sir," Dylan scoffed. "I'm the guy on the magazine cover framed on the wall behind you. Give me the damn pen." The process server didn't smile. He handed over the envelope. "You have been served." Dylan frowned, the champagne glass suddenly heavy in his hand. "Served? What is this? A lawsuit from a competitor?" He ripped the envelope open, expecting a cease and desist from a rival firm. He pulled out a stack of documents. The paper was heavy, high-quality bond. At the top of the first page, in bold Times New Roman font, were the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, Audrey J. Moore. Respondent, Dylan A. Moore." Dylan froze, The room seemed to tilt. He read the first paragraph, his eyes darting frantically. Irreconcilable differences. Adultery. Demand for full forensic accounting of all offshore assets. "This is a joke," Dylan muttered, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. She's at yoga." "I don't think so, Mr. Moore," the process server said, turning to leave. "Have a nice day." As the door clicked shut, the bathroom door creaked open. Isabella peeked out. "Is the coast clear? Did you get the building?" Dylan didn't answer. He was staring at the third page of the document. Attached to the legal filing was a photograph. It was a grainy but undeniable picture of him and Isabella kissing outside a hotel in Soho 3 days ago. Below it was a time stamp, and below that was a photocopy of a positive pregnancy test. Not Audrey's. It was a test Isabella had taken and thrown in the trash at his apartment 2 weeks ago. He hadn't known she was pregnant, but apparently Audrey did. Dylan's legs gave out. He sank into his leather chair, the papers crinkling under his fist. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Moore?" Mrs. Higgins's voice returned, this time with a hint of steel. "Your wife is on line 1. She says she hopes you enjoyed the champagne." 6 hours earlier, at 8 a.m., the Moore household in Upper East Side was quiet. It was a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue, decorated in shades of cream and beige, tasteful, expensive, and cold. Audrey Moore sat at the marble kitchen island, sipping herbal tea. She was 34, with the kind of soft, unassuming beauty that men like Dylan often took for granted. She was 7 months pregnant, her hands resting protectively over the swell of her belly. To the outside world, Audrey was the lucky one. She had married the golden boy of Wall Street. She chaired 3 charities. She wore Chanel to grocery shop. But for the last 6 months, Audrey had been living in a silent horror movie. She watched Dylan rush around the kitchen, grabbing his espresso. He was on his phone, barking orders at an associate. He stopped briefly to kiss the top of her head. "Got to run, babe. Big merger today. Probably going to be late," he said, not looking her in the eye. He never looked her in the eye anymore. "The Japanese merger?" Audrey asked softly. "Yeah. Intense negotiations. Don't wait up." "Okay. Good luck, Dylan." She watched him leave. The heavy oak door slammed shut, and the silence rushed back in. Audrey didn't move for a long time. Then she calmly set her tea down and picked up her phone. "He's gone," she said into the receiver. "We're ready when you are, Mrs. Moore," the voice of Arthur Abernathy replied. Arthur was not a divorce lawyer. He was a shark in a suit. He cost $500 an hour, and he was worth every penny. Audrey stood up, the phantom pain of heartbreak replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She walked to the hallway closet. Inside, hidden behind a row of winter coats, was a cardboard box. She pulled it out. It wasn't heavy. It contained the life she had secretly curated over the last 4 months. It started with a receipt she found in Dylan's jacket pocket for a bracelet she never received. Then, the late-night texts he thought he deleted. Then, the private investigator she hired, a former NYPD detective named Miller. Miller had given her the photos. He had given her the audio recordings, but the final nail in the coffin was what she found in the bathroom trash of the corporate apartment Dylan claimed he only used for late nights. A pregnancy test wrapper. Isabella. That was her name. Audrey had looked her up. She was young, vibrant, and everything Audrey felt she wasn't anymore. Audrey walked into the living room and looked at the wedding photo on the mantelpiece. They looked so happy. Dylan looked adoring. She picked up the frame. "You underestimated me, Dylan," she whispered. "You thought I was just the wife. You forgot I was the one who edited your business school thesis. You forgot I was the one who gave you the seed money from my inheritance to start Moore Capital." She didn't throw the frame. She didn't scream. She simply placed it face down on the marble. At 10 a.m. the movers arrived. They weren't there to empty the house. That would be too obvious, too messy. They were there to move her essentials. "Just the nursery items and the master bedroom safe," Audrey instructed. She had opened the safe 3 days ago. Dylan, in his arrogance, used his birthday as the combination. She had removed her grandmother's jewelry, her passport, and, most importantly, the original copy of their prenuptial agreement. The prenup had a clause, inserted by her father's lawyer, which Dylan had laughed at 10 years ago. The infidelity clause. If Dylan were proven to be unfaithful, the division of assets wouldn't be 50-50. It would be 80-20 in her favor, and his controlling shares in Moore Capital would be placed in a trust for their children. By 1 p.m., Audrey was sitting in Arthur Abernathy's office in Midtown. The view from his window looked directly at Dylan's tower, 2 blocks away. "The papers are with the courier," Arthur said, adjusting his glasses. "He is scheduled to arrive at 2:15 p.m. Why that specific time?" Audrey smiled, a sad, thin smile. "Because every Friday at 2 p.m., Mrs. Higgins takes her lunch break. The relief receptionist lets anyone up if they look important. And at 2:15, Dylan always opens a bottle of champagne if he thinks he's had a good week. I wanted him to be toasting when his life fell apart." Arthur nodded, a flicker of fear and respect in his eyes. "You're a dangerous woman, Audrey." "I'm a mother," she corrected him, "and I'm protecting my child's future." She looked at her phone. She had one last text to send. It wasn't to Dylan. It was to Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins had always liked Audrey. Last Christmas, when Mrs. Higgins's husband was sick, Audrey had sent a specialist to their home, all expenses paid. Mrs. Higgins owed her. Text to Mrs. Higgins. 2:14 p.m. "He's with her in the office, isn't he? Please, Martha, put me through on the speaker after the courier leaves. I need to hear him lie one last time." Audrey watched the clock ticking on Arthur's wall. 2:14 p.m. 2:15 p.m. She picked up the office phone Arthur offered her. The line clicked. "Mr. Moore?" Mrs. Higgins's voice shook on the other end. "Your wife is on line 1. Audrey took a deep breath. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. "Hello, Dylan," she said, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "I hope you enjoyed the champagne. And tell Isabella she really should take prenatal vitamins. It's important for the baby." She hung up before he could say a word. "Now," Audrey said to Arthur, standing up and smoothing her maternity dress. "Let's go get some lunch. I'm starving." The silence that followed the click of the disconnect was heavier than the heavy oak door to the office. It was a physical weight, pressing against Dylan's chest, constricting his lungs. For a man used to controlling the temperature, the lighting, and the mood of every room he entered, Dylan Moore suddenly felt like a stranger in his own sanctuary. He stared at the receiver in his hand. The black plastic was slick with sweat he hadn't realized was there. Audrey knows. The thought didn't just loop, it ricocheted inside his skull. Audrey knows about Isabella. Audrey knows about the pregnancy. Audrey knows everything. "Dylan?" Isabella's voice was small, trembling. She was standing near the bathroom door, clutching her purse with white-knuckled desperation. The bravado of the Instagram model had dissolved, leaving behind a terrified 24-year-old girl who had just heard her name, spoken by a woman she had never met, in a tone that sounded like a death sentence. Dylan slammed the phone down into its cradle. The noise made Isabella jump. "You!" Dylan hissed, turning on her. The vein in his forehead, usually invisible, was throbbing. "You told me you threw that test away. You told me it was negative." Isabella took a step back, hitting the wall. I did throw it away. In the bin at the apartment. And you didn't think to wrap it up? You didn't think to take it with you?" Dylan advanced on her, the papers in his hand, crunching. Audrey found it. She found the wrapper. She found the test. "I didn't think she went there," Isabella cried, tears welling up, ruining her mascara. "You said that apartment was strictly for business. You said she never went to the city." "She doesn't," Dylan roared, throwing the legal papers onto the desk. They fanned out, sliding across the mahogany, a spread of his destruction. Or I thought she didn't. God, she played me. She played me for months. He turned away from Isabella, raking his hands through his hair. He needed to think. He needed to be the CEO, crisis management, assess the damage, mitigate the fallout. He grabbed the papers again. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, skipping over the emotional words, betrayal, adultery, and hunting for the financial ones. That was the language he spoke. Petition for temporary restraining order on assets. Motion for discovery regarding Cayman Holdings, Shell Corporation, Blue Sky Ventures, and the Moore Family Trust. Dylan felt the blood drain from his face. Blue Sky Ventures. That wasn't just a slush fund. That was where he had been siphoning off the profits from the last 3 quarters to hide them from the IRS. And, ironically, to buy the Hamptons property he had promised Isabella. It was illegal. Highly illegal. If the IRS saw this, he wouldn't just be divorced. He would be in federal prison. "Dylan, what do we do?" Isabella whimpered, reaching out to touch his arm. He recoiled as if she were radioactive. "We? There is no we. Not anymore. You need to leave." "What?" "But you said—" "I said get out!" Dylan shouted, his voice cracking. "My wife just filed for divorce and is threatening to expose a federal crime because of you. Get out of my office. Get out of the building. And for God's sake, don't post anything on social media." Isabella stared at him, her mouth agape. The charm, the romance, the promises of a life of luxury. It all evaporated in the harsh, fluorescent light of his panic. She didn't argue. She grabbed her coat and ran out the door. Dylan didn't watch her go. He was already punching a number into his cell phone. Not his lawyer. He needed his banker. Come on, pick up, George," he muttered, pacing the length of the window. The view of Manhattan now looked like a prison yard. "Mr. Moore?" George's voice was smooth, professional. "I was just about to call you. George, listen to me. I need to move the funds from the Blue Sky account. Now, wire them to the suspense account in Zurich. Immediately." There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the line, the kind of silence that usually preceded a margin call. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Dylan," George said, his tone dropping a few degrees. "What do you mean you can't? It's my money." "We received a court order 20 minutes ago," George explained, his voice devoid of sympathy. "A forensic freeze has been placed on all accounts associated with your Social Security number, as well as the corporate accounts where you are the sole signatory. Even the credit cards, Dylan. It's a blanket freeze pending a forensic audit." Dylan felt his knees give way. He sank onto the expensive Persian rug, the phone slipping from his ear. 20 minutes. Audrey had timed it perfectly. She had the order ready to go the second the papers were served. The office door opened. Dylan looked up, expecting security. It was Mrs. Higgins. She stood in the doorway, holding a small cardboard box. She wasn't trembling anymore. She stood tall, her grey hair perfectly coiffed, her sensible shoes planted firmly on the carpet. She looked down at Dylan, the master of the universe, sitting on the floor. "Mrs. Higgins," Dylan breathed, scrambling to his feet, trying to regain some dignity. "Get security. Get my car. I need to go to the house." "I can't do that, Mr. Moore," she said calmly. Why not? Did Audrey get to you too? Did she pay you off? Dylan sneered, his aggression returning as a defense mechanism. Mrs. Higgins walked over to his desk. She placed her ID badge and her office keys next to the bottle of warm Dom Perignon. She didn't pay me off, Dylan, Mrs. Higgins said, using his first name for the first time in 20 years. She just treated me like a human being. When my husband was dying last year, you complained that I was taking too many personal calls. Audrey sent a private oncologist. She adjusted her glasses. I've forwarded your schedule to HR. I've also forwarded the email archive you asked me to delete last week, the ones regarding the insider trading on the TechCom merger, to Mrs. Moore's lawyer. I believe that falls under the Whistleblower Protection Act. Dylan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The betrayal was absolute. The walls were not just closing in, they were crushing him. Goodbye, Mr. Moore, Mrs. Higgins said. She turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. Dylan was alone. He looked at the window. He looked at the champagne. He looked at the legal papers. He grabbed the bottle of Dom Perignon and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, spraying expensive vintage foam over his framed degrees and awards. The smell of alcohol filled the room, mixing with the scent of his own fear. He ran to the door, intending to chase Mrs. Higgins, to beg, to threaten. He grabbed the handle. It didn't turn. He rattled it. Locked. He looked down. The electronic lock on the executive suite had been engaged from the outside. He pounded on the heavy wood. Open this door. Mrs. Higgins! Anyone! Silence. He was trapped in his glass tower, a prisoner of his own making, while 45 floors below, the city moved on, indifferent to the fall of a king. The suite at the St. Regis Hotel was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic energy Dylan was likely experiencing. Here the air was cool, scented with fresh white lilies, Audrey's favorite. Audrey Moore sat in a wing-back chair, her feet propped up on an ottoman. She had changed out of her public clothes into a soft cashmere robe that accommodated her 7-month belly. Her hand rested on the mound, feeling the slow, deliberate movements of her unborn daughter. He's tried calling the house line 40 times, a deep, gravelly voice said from the dining table. Frank Miller, the private investigator, sat surrounded by laptops and stacks of files. He was a man who looked like he had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. He chewed on a toothpick, scrolling through a tablet. And he's tried your cell 20 times. He's currently trying to call the doorman at your building, but we switched out the staff an hour ago. Let him ring, Audrey said, her eyes closed. He's panic dialing. He's not thinking. He's reacting. She opened her eyes and looked at the whiteboard Miller had set up. It was a timeline of Dylan's life for the past year. Photos of Isabella, receipts from dinners, flight manifests. But the most damning part was the financial flowchart in red marker. It wasn't just the affair. The affair was the trigger, the emotional catalyst. But the crime was the finance. Are you sure the freeze held? Audrey asked. Arthur just texted, Miller confirmed. The judge signed the order at 2:10 p.m. The banks froze everything at 2:17 p.m. Dylan tried to move $4 million to Zurich at 2:22 p.m. Transaction declined. The bank flagged it as suspicious activity immediately. Audrey nodded slowly. It should have felt good. It should have felt like victory. But it just felt exhausting. She remembered the day the illusion shattered. It wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday, 4 months ago. She was doing laundry because the housekeeper was sick. She picked up Dylan's suit jacket, the grey Hugo Boss one. She smelled it. It wasn't perfume. Dylan was too smart for that. It was the faint, lingering scent of menthol cigarettes. Dylan hated smoking. He claimed to be allergic, but Isabella, as Audrey later learned, smoked Virginia Slims when she drank. That scent was the thread. Audrey pulled it, and the whole tapestry unraveled. "You know," Audrey said softly, looking out the window at the skyline where Dylan's office tower stood like a needle. "He told me that I didn't understand business. He said I was too soft for the corporate world. That's why he took over managing my inheritance." Miller chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "The irony is rich, Mrs. Moore. You just executed the most hostile takeover I've seen in 30 years of police work and private security. You didn't just divorce him, you deplatformed him." "I had to," Audrey said, her voice hardening. "If I just divorced him, he would have fought me for custody. He would have used his money to bury me in legal fees for years. He would have dragged my name through the mud. The only way to win against a narcissist, Frank, is to take away his fuel." She shifted in the chair, a grimace of discomfort crossing her face as the baby kicked a rib. "Are you okay?" Miller asked, looking up with genuine concern. "I'm fine. She's just active today. She knows." Audrey rubbed her belly. "She knows her mother is fighting for her." There was a knock at the door, not the frantic pounding Dylan was doing, but a polite, rhythmic tap. Miller stood up, checking the peephole. "It's Arthur." He opened the door, and Arthur Abernathy swept in. He looked flushed, exhilarated. For a lawyer, this was the Super Bowl. "Audrey," Arthur said, placing his briefcase on the table. "It's pandemonium over there. My source in the building says security had to let him out of his own office because the electronic lock malfunctioned." Audrey allowed herself a small, cold smile. "Technology can be so unreliable." "Indeed," Arthur grinned. "But here is the news. The board of directors has called an emergency meeting for 8:15 a.m. tomorrow. They know about the freeze. They know about the potential embezzlement investigation. Stock prices are already wobbling in the after-hours trading." "Good," Audrey said. "They want to talk to you," Arthur said, his expression turning serious. "You own 20% of the company directly through your father's initial shares. But with the forensic accounting proving he used your money to fund Blue Sky, we can argue that his controlling stake is actually fruit of the poisonous tree. In short, Audrey, by tomorrow morning, you could be the majority voting power of Moore Capital." Audrey stared at the lawyer. This was the part she hadn't fully processed. She didn't want the company. She hated the company. It was the Mistress that had taken Dylan away long before Isabella arrived. "I don't want to run it, Arthur," she said. "You don't have to," Arthur said gently. "You just have to own it. Because if you own it, you control him. You control his severance. You control his narrative. You control whether he goes to jail or goes to rehab." Audrey stood up, walking to the window. The city lights were flickering on, a sea of diamonds. She thought of Dylan, not the monster he had become, but the man she married, the man who used to read poetry to her, the man who cried when they found out she was pregnant. Somewhere, buried under layers of greed and ego, that man might still exist. But she couldn't afford to look for him. Not now. "Set up the meeting," Audrey said, turning back to the room. Her silhouette against the window was sharp and unyielding. "But not at the office. Tell the board to come here, to the hotel. If they want to save their company, they come to me." "And Dylan?" Arthur asked. "He will try to be there." "Let him come," Audrey said. "I want him to look me in the eye when I take his chair." She walked over to the table and picked up a file marked Isabella. "And what about the girl?" Miller asked. "She's been blowing up Dylan's phone, but he's blocked her." She's panicked. She's young, Audrey. She's stupid. But she's just a kid. Audrey looked at the photo of Isabella. 24. Beautiful. Foolish. Pregnant? Maybe not. The test was real, but was she keeping it? Was it even Dylan's? She's a casualty, Audrey said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But she knew he was married. She knew I was pregnant. She posted photos from my vacation home. She slept in my sheets. Audrey dropped the file back onto the table. Send her a message, Frank. Anonymous. Tell her that if she testifies about the fake business trips, about the gifts bought with company funds, tell her we will ensure she isn't named in the embezzlement lawsuit. Offer her a lifeboat. Miller nodded, impressed. Divide and conquer. No, Audrey said, placing her hand over her heart. It's not about conquering. It's about cleaning house. I want everything that Dylan Moore built on lies to be torn down so I can build something honest for my daughter. She looked at the clock. 6 p.m. Order dinner, Audrey commanded, her voice returning to a tone of calm authority. I need to eat. And then I need to sleep. Tomorrow I become the CEO of my husband's nightmare. As the two men went to work, Audrey walked back to the window. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. Sleep well, Dylan, she whispered to the city. It's the last night of rest you're going to get for a very long time. The sun had set over Manhattan, replaced by a cold, persistent drizzle that blurred the city lights into streaks of neon and grey. For Dylan Moore, the weather felt like a personal insult. He stood on the sidewalk outside the Moore Capitol building, shivering in his bespoke suit. He had finally been released from his office, not by a locksmith, but by the night shift security guard, a young man named Kevin, who looked at Dylan with a mixture of pity and confusion. Mrs. Higgins said you might have lost your key fob, Mr. Moore, Kevin had said, holding the door open. She said you were having a rough day. Dylan hadn't answered. He had stormed past the reception desk, expecting his driver, Thomas, to be waiting at the curb with the heated S-Class Mercedes. The curb was empty. Dylan pulled out his phone. 14% battery. He dialed Thomas. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. The automated voice droned. Dylan cursed, the sound harsh in the wet air. Audrey hadn't just fired the staff. She had scorched the earth. She had cut the lines of communication. He opened his Uber app. His fingers trembled as he typed in the destination. The penthouse, Park Avenue. He hit request. Payment declined. He tried his Amex Platinum. Declined. He tried his Visa Infinite. Declined. A wave of nausea rolled over him. He was Dylan Moore. He had moved $40 million before breakfast. And now he couldn't hail a ride across town. He looked around. People were rushing past him, heads down against the rain, ignoring the man in the soaking wet Tom Ford suit. He was invisible. He found a $20 bill crumpled in his jacket pocket, forgotten change from a coffee run weeks ago. He flagged a yellow taxi, practically throwing himself into the back seat. Park and 72nd, he barked, and step on it. The ride was a blur of frustration. Dylan sat in the back, the vinyl seat sticky and smelling of stale pine air freshener. He formulated his plan. He would go home. He would break a window if he had to. He would get into his safe, the one in the study, not the bedroom. He had emergency cash there, passports. He would regroup. He would call his fixer in D.C. The taxi pulled up to the limestone awning of his building. The doorman, Jerry, was standing guard. Jerry had worked there for 12 years. Dylan tipped him $500 every Christmas. Dylan threw the 20 at the driver and marched toward the glass doors. "Good evening, Mr. Moore," Jerry said, stepping in front of the door. He didn't open it. "Evening, Jerry. Open the door. I'm freezing." "I can't do that, sir," Jerry said. His face was impassive, but his eyes darted away. "Excuse me?" Dillon laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "I own the penthouse, Jerry. Open the damn door." "Mrs. Moore changed the locks 3 hours ago, sir, and she provided the board with a restraining order. It states you are not to come within 500 feet of the residence or her person." Jerry reached into his podium and pulled out a piece of paper. "She left a bag for you." He handed Dillon a gym bag. It was an old Nike duffel bag Dillon used for squash. It was light. Dillon grabbed it, unzipping it violently on the sidewalk. Inside were 3 changes of clothes, his toiletries, and a sleeping bag. A sleeping bag. "Is this a joke?" Dillon screamed, the facade finally cracking. "I live here. My wife is up there." "Mrs. Moore is not on the premises, sir," Jerry said, his voice hardening. "And the police have been notified that you might attempt to breach the order. They are 2 minutes away." Dillon looked at Jerry. He saw the resolve in the man's eyes. He realized then that Jerry had never liked him. Jerry had liked Audrey. Everyone liked Audrey. Sirens wailed in the distance. Dillon grabbed the duffel bag and ran. He ran down Park Avenue, the rain plastering his hair to his skull, his Italian leather shoes splashing in puddles of oil and grime. He had nowhere to go. No friends. His friends were business associates who would smell the blood in the water. No family. His parents were dead, and he had alienated his brother years ago over a loan dispute. He had one person, Isabella. He hailed another cab, using the last of the cash he found in the gym bag side pocket. He arrived at her building in the East Village at 9:00 p.m. It was a trendy, converted warehouse he paid the rent for. $6,500 a month. He buzzed the intercom. No answer. He buzzed again. Long, angry presses. "Who is it?" Her voice was tinny, frightened. "It's me. Let me in." There was a long pause. The buzzer finally buzzed. Dillon took the stairs 2 at a time. He needed a drink. He needed a shower. He needed to tell Isabella that it was going to be okay, that he would fix it, that they would sue Audrey for everything she had. He burst into the apartment. "Pack a bag," he ordered, slamming the door. "We're going to a hotel, the St. Regis or the Plaza. I'll sort out the cards in the morning." Isabella was standing in the middle of the living room. She was already packing. But she wasn't packing for a hotel. She was packing everything. Suitcases were open on the floor. Boxes were taped shut. "We're not going to a hotel, Dillon," she said. She wasn't wearing the silk robe he bought her. She was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie. She looked young and tired. "What are you talking about?" Dillon dropped the gym bag. He walked to the kitchen, hunting for liquor. He found a bottle of vodka and took a swig straight from the neck. "I'm going back to Ohio," Isabella said. "My dad is driving up to get me. He'll be here in an hour." Dillon froze, the vodka burning his throat. "Ohio? You're leaving me? Now?" "I spoke to a man," Isabella said, her voice trembling. "A Mr. Miller. He called me right after you kicked me out of your office." Dillon's eyes narrowed. "Audrey's hired goon. What did you tell him?" "I didn't tell him anything. At first," Isabella said. She zipped up a suitcase. "But he told me about the lawsuit, Dillon. He told me about the embezzlement. He said that if I stayed with you, I'd be named as an accomplice. He said the government could seize my bank accounts. They could seize my car." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm 24. I can't go to prison, Dillon. I can't be broke." "I'm not broke!" Dillon roared, smashing the vodka bottle onto the counter. Glass exploded. "It's a temporary freeze. I have millions in offshore accounts." "Mr. Miller said those accounts are the evidence," Isabella whispered. "He offered me a deal. If I sign an affidavit stating that the trips we took were personal, not business, if I give them the jewelry you bought with the corporate card, They leave me out of it." Dylan stared at her. The room seemed to spin. "You sold me out. You threw me out of your office," she screamed back, her fear turning into anger. "You told me to get out. You didn't care about me, Dylan. You cared about your building. You cared about your money. You never loved me. You just loved that I made you feel young." She dragged her suitcase to the door. "My dad is waiting downstairs," she lied. She just wanted to get away from the look in his eyes. "Isabella, wait. The baby," Dylan stammered, reaching out. "We have a child." Isabella stopped with her hand on the doorknob. She looked back at him, her expression unreadable. "I took another test an hour ago," she said quietly. "It was negative. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was a chemical pregnancy. Or maybe—" She trailed off. "Maybe I just got lucky." The door slammed. Dylan was alone in the apartment he paid for, surrounded by the ghosts of a fun, frivolous life that had cost him everything. He sat on the floor amidst the packing peanuts and broken glass. He pulled the gym bag toward him and unzipped it. On top of the clothes, Audrey had packed something else. It was a small, framed photo. Not of them, but of him, standing in front of his first tiny office in Brooklyn, 15 years ago. He was wearing a cheap suit, grinning, his arm around Audrey. They had nothing then, and they were happy. Dylan curled up on the floor, clutching the photo, and for the first time since he was a child, he wept. He wept not for the money, but for the terrifying realization that he was the villain in his own story. The St. Regis Hotel suite had been transformed. What was once a luxurious living space was now a command center. The dining table had been extended, covered in black velvet, turning it into a makeshift boardroom table. It was 7:45 a.m. Audrey Moore stood in front of the full-length mirror in the bedroom. She wasn't wearing the soft robes of yesterday. She was armored. She wore a navy blue maternity dress that commanded authority. Tailored, sharp, expensive. A single strand of pearls, her grandmother's, hung around her neck. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. "You look like a queen regent," Arthur Abernathy said from the doorway. He was holding a tablet, checking the stock pre-market. "More Capital is down 12%. The street is nervous. They need a leader." "They don't need a leader, Arthur," Audrey said, smoothing the fabric over her belly. "They need a savior, and they need a sacrifice. Today I give them both." She walked into the main room. Frank Miller was there, standing by the door like a sentinel. "The board is in the lobby," Miller reported. "All 7 of them. They look like they're attending a funeral." "Send them up," Audrey said. She took her seat at the head of the table. She didn't stand when they entered. It was a power move she had learned from Dylan. Make them come to you. The 7 men and 1 woman who comprised the board of directors of More Capital filed in. These were titans of industry, people who controlled billions. But as they looked at the pregnant woman sipping tea at the head of the table, they looked unsure. "Gentlemen, Margaret," Audrey nodded to them. "Please, sit." "Mrs. Moore," began Elias Thorne, the chairman of the board. He was a man of 70, with a voice like gravel. "This is highly irregular. Meeting in a hotel room, while the company stock is in free fall? The company stock is in free fall because of the man sitting in the CEO's chair," Audrey said calmly. "I am here to stop the bleeding. Do you want to see the wound, Elias? Or do you want to keep pretending it's a scratch?" She gestured to Arthur. Arthur distributed a thick, leather-bound dossier to each board member. "This," Audrey announced, "is the forensic audit of Blue Sky Ventures. It is a shell company registered in the Seychelles. The sole beneficiary is Dylan Moore." The room went silent as pages were turned. "Page 4, Audrey directed. You will see a transfer of $12 million from the Moore Pension Fund. Page 8, a diversion of the Q3 Tech dividends. Margaret, the only other woman on the board, gasped. He touched the pension fund? That's federal. That's prison time. Precisely, Audrey said. Dylan didn't just cheat on me, Margaret. He cheated all of you. He exposed this entire firm to RICO charges. Elias Thorne looked up, his face pale. Audrey. If this gets out. It won't get out, Audrey interrupted. Not if we handle it today. I have a plan to restitute the funds using my personal assets and the liquidation of Dylan's private holdings. We can frame it as an internal accounting error that was swiftly corrected by new management. But that only works if Dylan is removed. Immediately. For cause. The door to the suite flew open. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a breach. Dylan Moore stood in the doorway. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck. His suit was wrinkled, stained with rain and sweat. His eyes were bloodshot, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. He hadn't shaved. He held the gym bag in one hand. "You can't do this!" Dylan shouted, his voice hoarse. He stepped into the room, but Miller stepped forward, blocking his path to the table. "Sit down, Dylan," Audrey said. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke to him like one speaks to a misbehaving child. "This is my board," Dylan pointed a shaking finger at Elias. "Elias, tell her. She's crazy. She's vindictive. She's making this up because I had an affair." Elias didn't look at Dylan. He looked at the dossier. "Is it true, Dylan? Did you authorize the transfer to Blue Sky?" "It was a bridge loan," Dylan stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I was going to pay it back after the Tokyo deal closed. It's standard practice." "It's embezzlement," Margaret snapped, slamming the file shut. "You used the pension fund to buy a villa in the Hamptons, Dylan. We have the wire transfers." Dylan looked around the room. He saw the faces of his mentors, his peers. They were looking at him with disgust. Not because he stole, but because he got caught. Because he was messy. He turned his gaze to Audrey. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her stomach. "Audrey," he pleaded, his tone shifting from anger to desperation. "Baby, please, don't do this. We can work this out. Think of the company. Think of our child." Audrey stood up slowly. The room held its breath. "I am thinking of our child, Dylan," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a diamond blade. "That is why I am ensuring her father doesn't bankrupt her future." She picked up a single sheet of paper from her side of the table. "This is the affidavit from Isabella Rossi," Audrey said. Dylan flinched as if he'd been struck. "She details the dates, the times, and the corporate funds used to facilitate your affair. But more importantly," Audrey looked him in the eye, "she confirms that you told her about the pension fund theft during a trip to St. Bart's, a trip paid for by this company. It was the final nail. The room knew it. Dylan knew it. Isabella hadn't just left him. She had handed Audrey the murder weapon. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence," Elias Thorne said quietly, "and the immediate termination of Dylan Moore as CEO, effective this second." "Seconded," Margaret said. "All in favor?" Elias asked. Every hand in the room went up, even the ones Dylan thought were his allies. Dylan stood there, his hand still gripping the handle of the gym bag. He had built this room. He had chosen these people. And in 10 minutes, his wife had turned them all into his executioners. "You're fired, Dylan," Audrey said. Dylan opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The fight had left him. The adrenaline crashed, leaving only a hollow, aching void. "Security is waiting in the hall," Audrey continued. "They will escort you out. You are not to return to the building. You are not to contact any employee. And Dylan?" He looked up, his eyes glassy. "I've arranged for a car to take you to the rehab facility in Connecticut," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. A ghost of the wife she used to be. "It's paid for. Go there. Get sober. Get your head straight. For your own sake." Dylan looked at her one last time. He looked at the belly that held his daughter. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to scream. But he knew, with a terrifying clarity, that he had lost the right to do either. He turned around, his shoulders slumped, and walked out of the room. Miller followed him, closing the door with a final, decisive click. The silence in the room was heavy. "Well," Elias cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "That's done. Now, about the interim leadership." "I will step in as interim chairwoman," Audrey said, sitting back down. She picked up her tea, her hand steady. "Arthur has the paperwork. We have a press release going out in 5 minutes, stating that Dylan is stepping down for health reasons. We will stabilize the stock by noon." The board nodded, relieved, impressed, and terrified. They realized then that they hadn't just fired a CEO. They had crowned a new matriarch. Audrey looked out the window at the morning sun, hitting the steel and glass of the city. She had won. She had destroyed the man who betrayed her. She had saved her fortune. But as she felt the baby kick, a single tear rolled down her cheek, quickly wiped away before anyone could see. Victory, she realized, tasted remarkably like ashes. 6 months later, the snow fell softly on Central Park, dusting the trees in white powder. Inside the warm, wood-paneled office that used to belong to Dylan, Audrey stood by the window. In her arms, wrapped in a pink knitted blanket, was 3-month-old Victoria. The office had changed. The cold leather and chrome were gone, replaced by softer textures, family photos, and a playpen in the corner. Moore Capital was profitable again. The scandal swept under the rug as a corporate restructuring, just as Audrey had promised. The intercom buzzed. It was Mrs. Higgins, who had been promoted to office manager. "He's here, Mrs. Moore," she said gently. "Send him in." The door opened. Dylan walked in. He looked different. The bloated look of expensive scotch and late nights was gone, replaced by a gaunt, sober sharpness. He wore a suit, but it was off the rack, not bespoke. He had been living in a rented 1-bedroom in Queens since his release from the facility in Connecticut. He stopped in the middle of the room, his eyes instantly locking onto the bundle in Audrey's arms. "She's beautiful," Dylan said, his voice cracking. "She looks like your mother." "She has your chin," Audrey said quietly, rocking Victoria. "And your stubbornness." Dylan took a step forward, then stopped, remembering the boundaries. "I signed the final papers downstairs. Arthur walked me through it. The 80-20 split. The trust fund for Victoria. It's all done." "Good," Audrey said. "I also signed the NDA," Dylan continued, wringing his hands. "I won't talk to the press about Isabella or the funds. I just want to start over, Audrey. I'm consulting for a small firm in Jersey. It's not much, but it's honest work." "I'm glad to hear that, Dylan. Truly." "Can I—" Dylan swallowed hard. "Can I hold her? Just for a minute? Before I go?" Audrey hesitated. She looked at the man who had shattered her world, and then she looked at the daughter who had saved it. Her anger had faded into a dull scar. It was still there, but it didn't bleed anymore. "Sit down," she commanded softly. Dylan sat on the sofa. Audrey walked over and carefully placed the sleeping baby in his arms. Dylan looked down at his daughter. Tears spilled onto his cheeks, silent and fast. For 5 minutes, the room was quiet. He held the weight of his own foolishness in his arms. He realized then that no amount of money, no young mistress, and no power trip was worth the warmth of this tiny life he had almost thrown away. "Time's up," Audrey said, reaching out. Dylan surrendered the baby. He stood up, wiping his face. He looked at Audrey, really looked at her, and saw the strength he had ignored for years. "I lost the best thing that ever happened to me," he whispered. "Yes," Audrey said, her voice devoid of malice, just stating a fact. "You did. But you have a second chance to be a father, Dylan. Don't waste that too." She turned back to the window. "Goodbye, Dylan." Dylan walked to the door. He paused, looking back at the warm, golden light of the office, at his wife and child. Then he stepped out into the cold, grey hallway. The elevator doors closed, sealing him out of the empire he built and the family he broke. Audrey watched the snow fall, holding Victoria close. She was alone at the top, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't lonely. She was free. And that is how Audrey Moore turned her heartbreak into a hostile takeover. Dylan thought he could trade his family for a fleeting thrill, but he forgot the most important rule of business and life. Never underestimate the partner who helped you build your throne. In the end, Dylan walked away with his freedom, but Audrey kept the legacy, the fortune, and the future. This story reminds us that loyalty is an expensive gift. Don't expect it from cheap people. But it also teaches us that sometimes the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting. It's succeeding without the person who held you back. What would you have done if you were Audrey? Would you have taken the company or just walked away? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next real-life drama. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.